We're going to start off first with the Pledge of Allegiance by our club second vice president, Heman Shah. Come on up, Heman, and
Yes, I'm here. I'm here.
look at my flag background. If everyone would stand, please.
Yes, I pledge allegiance
to the
to
flag
of the United
States
of
of
America,
and to the
and to the
republic
republic
for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
for all.
Okay, thank you. Please remain standing. We're going to have the opening prayer now. It's going to be led by, we're, delighted to have with us Dr. Jyoti Gandhi to lead us in the opening prayer. Dr. Gandhi is a religious leader from the Jain community who will be offering the opening prayer. She is a retired physician, the past president of the Jain Center of America, a past president of Arch, an organization offering free medical and healthcare assistance to impoverished people in Western India. So, Joe, before we go, can we mute everyone except for Dr. Joe?
Okay, Dr. Gandhi, unmute yourself, please.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. How is everything?
Hello.
Hi. Jainism puts a significant emphasis on the thought process of a human being. A person's behavior and actions are the reflection of their internal thoughts day in and day out. And for that, we give more importance to the four virtues that is known as Maitri, Pramod, Karuna, and Madhyastha. Maitri means amity, love, and friendship. Pramod Bhavana is appreciation, respect, and joy. Compassion is for Karuna, and equanimity or tolerance is Madhyastha. So before I sing a prayer, I will explain the meaning of that so it might help you out better. May the sacred stream of amity flow forever in my heart. May the universe prosper. Such is my cherished desire. May my heart sing with ecstasy at the sight of virtuous. May my life be an offering at their feet. May my heart bleed at the sight of rash, cruel, and irreligious. May tears of compassion flow from my eyes. May I always be there to show the path to the pathless wanderers of the life. Yet, if they should not listen to me, may I bide in patience. May the spirit of goodwill enter in all our hearts. May we all sing in chorus the immortal song of human concord. Maitri bhavanu pavitra charanu mujhe mavaya kare subhata sakal vishwanu evi bhavana nitya rahe गुणति भरेला गुणी जन देखी अय्यो मारू नृत्य करे ते चरणों ना चरण कमल मा मुझ जीवन नु अर्ध रहे दीन क्रूर ने धर्म विहोणा देखी दिल मा दर्द रहे करुणा बीनी आँखों माती अश्रुनो शुभ स्रोत वही मार्ग भूलेला जीवन पथिक ने मार्ग चिंदवा उभो रहो करे उपेक्षाए मार्गनी तो ये समता चित्त धरो चित्र भानुनिद भावना कई सौ मानव लावे वेर जेर ना पाप तजीने मंगल गीतों सौ गावे मंगल गीतों सौ गावे. I hope everybody has a nice day. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you so much.
Doctor.
Thank you.
Very
Beautiful.
much for that
That was
beautiful
beautiful.
prayer, Dr. Gandhi. I want to welcome everybody to the Queens Village Republican Club, America's oldest Republican club. Thank you very much, Dr. Gandhi, for that beautiful prayer. And I want to say to everyone a happy Pesach and a happy Easter during this Holy Week. When we begin every meeting, we recite our mission statement. The mission statement of the Queens Village Republican Club is that we support the principles of the Republican Party and elect Republicans. We fight to elect Republicans who support those principles here in Queens and New York City. Those principles are constitutionally limited government, maximum personal freedom. We support the First Amendment right of free speech, religious freedom, the Second Amendment right to bear arms. We believe in the sanctity of life and traditional family values. We support free market capitalism and the right of every individual every citizen of America to pursue the American dream. And we support our veterans. We support our U.S. Armed Forces. We support the great NYPD, New York's finest, our police, and we support our firefighters and first responders, and we support our President Trump and his America First agenda. And we will stand with our president, and we will never give up the fight to make America great again. So that, is our mission statement of the Queens Village Republican Club. And tonight we're having a very important meeting on a topic of concern to all of us. And it won't be the last meeting on this topic. And it's what's happening to America's schools and what we can do about it. Now, many schools we know are governed by rules that they must stay out of politics. They must stay aloof from politics and never use their institutions as instruments to advance a partisan political agenda or use the classroom for the purposes of political indoctrination. But we know this has been ignored. This has been dismissed throughout our country. We will get exposed to what the extent of the problem throughout our country, in our schools, from elementary to through college, by our an expert panel of speakers in the field, and they will propose solutions. Many people are doing great things to take back our schools. They're organizing, they're proposing solutions, they're fighting back to take back our schools, and we will hear about that tonight. So let's get on with our program. Before we begin our program of speakers, I want to acknowledge a few longtime friends and dignitaries and candidates who are with us tonight. I don't know if they're here at this time, but some of them are. I'm sorry if I don't mention everybody's name. Don't get mad at me if I miss your name. Everyone here is a dignitary. Everyone is important and a VIP. So I want to introduce, just give a shout out of introduction to Alex Amoroso. He's our Republican City Council candidate here in the 23rd Councilmanic District. Want to say hello to Joe Murray. Give him a shout out. He's a former Republican Queens DA candidate. Bill Kraegler is a former candidate, Republican candidate for Queensborough president. George Levy is here with us, the vice chair of the Queens County Conservative Party. Rabbi Spiro is with us tonight, or he will be joining us shortly. He will be here. He's also known as America's Rabbi, and he hosts the Rabbi Spiro Show on CRN Talk Radio. He once keynoted one of our Lincoln dinners. He spoke for an hour, and everyone was in rapt attention. He's an amazing, articulate defender of the Western civilizations and our conservative values. Professor Mitchell Langbird is here from Brooklyn College, though he lives a little north of that, upstate. He was at one of our meetings in the past when we had an in-person meeting. Professor Rena Yarmish is joining us tonight. She's also a professor from Brooklyn College. Other teachers and educational professionals are here with us tonight who shall remain nameless for the sake of this, program tonight. We're going to start with our program in a second, but first I want to call upon Jim Trent, the chairman of the Queens Village Republican Club. He'll give us a chairman's report. Jim, come on off mute and come on up and give your report.
Okay, I guess I'm on now. So there are just two things I wanted to cover. Normally, we have a wide variety of sources of income to support the club. With the shutdown of our meeting hall and the general lockdown, we're reduced now to only one source of income, and that's the dues. Dues notices have gone out. A lot of checks have come in, but there are still others we're waiting on. So please, it is the source of income that now we rely on 100%. So send your checks in. You also have the alternative of going to our website and purchasing your membership dues through a website. You can do it online. So just be aware of that opportunity. The second thing is one of the myriad things that we've done over the years with different types of events, some of them not even political, but just as a form of information and camaraderie, is the historic bus trips. Now, we have done all 5 boroughs. Last year, we were planning to start the cycle over again. I had a really great itinerary set up for Queens, but with the lockdown and the museums having to close, we had to skip last year. It appears we're going to have to skip this year as well. Not everybody's been vaccinated, and many people are still afraid to come out. But I'm hoping that next year we will resume going to historic sites. We don't get a huge turnout, but those who do come rave about the day. It's a full day. We leave from the Farm Museum, we return back to the Queens County Farm Museum, and we visit sites that many New Yorkers, even born here, never knew existed. So it's a very, very interesting and mentally stimulating event, but we'll have to put it off until May 2022. Okay, Phil, back to you.
Okay, thank you, Jim. And now we have our speakers here for our panel. The moderator of our panel is our first vice president, former NYPD captain, our very own Joe Kincannon. So take it away, Joe. It's all yours. You got to take yourself off mute.
Really? Okay. Hi, everybody, and good evening, and welcome to our meeting tonight. Just to give everybody a sense of what's going to happen tonight, I'm going to be introducing the panel of speakers, addressing the indoctrination of our children from elementary school to college and how we can rebuild America's public education system. The first part will be the speaker's presentation on the topic. The second part, the speakers will offer their solutions. And the third part will be a Q&A. All right. If you've got a question or a comment later on or during the presentation, please put it in the chat and I'll refer to it. We've already gotten a number of questions in advance of the program. All right, so just hang in there, and we're going to take off. All right, I'm going to share my screen just for 1 second here, if I can remember how to do that. There we go. And there we go. And there we go. Okay, you are sharing. Okay, good. All right, can everybody see Jerry's picture? Yes. Thank you, Phil. Okay. All right. So our first speaker this evening is Jerry Matakata. He's the founder of the History Seminar Series at Queens Community College, and worked 32 years for the New York City Public School teaching high school American history. Jerry, are you with us?
I am with you.
Take it away, Jerry. It's all yours.
This was a topic that's very dear to my heart and to most teachers that are out there. We've had, actually, there's been big changes in the last 3 years. It's been happening slowly, but the last 3 years has been a progressive to a complete change in how history and civic education has been taught. Actually, it's gone on for about 150 years, how history was taught. Person that is the founder to us, to teachers, to educators, is a man called Horace Mann. And he was out of Massachusetts, and he founded basically American public education. And it's always been that within public education, there's been curriculums for each of the subjects, whether it be history, civics, science, math, English, and other subjects. These curriculums would be worked out most of the time by teachers, but sometimes by officials that were part of a curriculum committee. For 150 years, there's been an American history and world history curriculum. It was a narrative of Western civilization, basically to British roots, to the founding of America, the progress of democracy in America, America as the exceptional nation in the world, as Lincoln said, the best last hope of the world, a beacon of light and in a world of darkness. I think this resonates with you because if you're, been in schools, this is sort of the narrative that you heard when you were in junior high and high school and college. It highlighted individual worth, personal responsibility, origins of democratic principles, and institutions. Sound familiar? I think we all have gone through. We know, and some of us can do this in our sleeps, starting with the Puritans and the Native Americans and then the colonies, the Declaration of Independence. It was that narrative, Civil War. And then as we've gone on, we've added other narratives, such as the Civil Rights Struggle, Vietnam, present day events. In 2005, there was a change, and it came out of 2003. It came out of Massachusetts. Again, Massachusetts has been a stronghold of public education. I've worked in the colleges, and if you look at colleges, I think Massachusetts has the largest percentage of colleges of any state in the union. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. It's a hotbed for education. So what they did in 2003, they came out with the Massachusetts History Framework. Now, I don't want you to go crazy and say, oh my God, it's going to be some, weird left-wing change in the narrative that's been going on for 150 years. I actually thought that and many historians thought that the Massachusetts History Framework, which was for world history and American history, was a great addition to the curriculum. It added to it. And what it did was it added contributions of immigrant groups, women, Native Americans, minorities. It also, in world history, added Chinese civilization, Islam and the Middle Eastern civilizations, African civilizations. It basically was a narrative from Egypt to now of the progress of mankind. It included missteps and it included highlights. For instance, one of the main missteps that they had in this curriculum was the Chinese Cultural Revolution under Mao, which happened in the late 1960s. It also included the great narrative of America landing on the moon, also the late 60s. So this narrative went on until about 2016-17. What happened was left-wing professors at Tufts, a man named Professor Levine, and at Harvard wanted to change the Massachusetts curriculum. Now, this curriculum was a change, but they felt it was not inclusive enough, whatever that means. I have no idea. I don't know what it means in their words. These left-wingers always use semantics in order to get where they're going. Diversity, inclusive, social justice, but that's what they said, this has to be changed. Now, what they saw as change is the new history was going to be the history of the oppressor versus the oppressed. Now, where did they come up with this? Well, they came up with it from Howard Zinn, who had written a history of America that was being circulated in the colleges. This was, basically an anti-American tract of seeing American history as oppressor versus oppressed. I have nothing against Howard Zinn's book as a book. He has every right to write the book. I disagree with the premise of the book. I disagree with the histories in the book. But I would never be a person that would say, let's ban Howard Zinn's book. But Howard Zinn's book, among history professors and among some history students in colleges and others, politicians, has become on the same grail as the Bible. In other words, this is the only truth out there. This is the truth that we must teach every student in order for them to understand that. Now, they have started something which I just saw today, and it's relevant for this. In New Jersey, it's already leading there. It's called Action Projects. Now, we all on this call think, and I think we all agree, that civic education is important. In other words, how the government works, how you can get involved in government, the history of the Constitution, the history of Declaration of Independence, history of British law, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that's what we believe. But what they're trying to do, and we have to be very vigilant to this, they're changing the word civics. They are saying, yes, we're all in favor of civic education. Great. We're going to get the students to learn civics. Civics has been left out of the curriculum and hasn't been out there as much as it should be. So, yes, we're for curriculum. This is a trick. This is a trick that the fascists use, a trick that the communists use. Do not fall for the trick, because their view of civics is not the same view as you have or most people in this country. Their civics is called Action Projects. And what they want to do is have students to protest and get credit in the classroom for writing up protests, doing protests, becoming part of BLM, become part of these social justice organizations. And that's the civics that is going to be taught to these kids in the classroom. I know it's frightening. It's frightening to me as an educator. Soon as you hear the word civics, you're okay with it, but don't be. because it is not what you think it is. They also, and the Democratic Party, which, we know where they're at right now, they are pushing that since these kids are going to be given civic education at 16, 17, 15, that they're going to be ready to vote. So it's connected. You have these social justice organizations, these extreme left organizations, and our good buddies, the Democratic Party, all working for this Action Project Civics Education, in which now they're going to claim that the kids are ready to vote because they have done these things. So the reward for the kids, see, this is how communism works, fascism works. The reward for the kids, if they do civics, which is only active civics, in other words, if they go into these so-called protests, they then will be able to know enough to vote. Now, they're saying that this is nonpartisan. In other words, the kids will be able to do this civics based on whatever it's going to be. In other words, it could be centrist, right, left. It's, the projects can be any of those things. But we all know that kids now are under a shame world. In other words, on social media, a lot of these kids agree with us on centrist and right, but they're afraid to say a word because if they say anything in class, other students may attack them, but believe it or not, the teachers will attack them. They will give them lower grades. They will tell them in front of kids. They will criticize their opinions in front of kids. That's what's going to happen with this civic education. This is another danger that is out there. Now, one of the things that we have to look at is the history of this. This is an old playbook. The playbook was from 1917, 1933, 1949, 1960. Notice what I named. Russian Revolution, fascist takeover of Germany, Communist China's cultural change in 1949 to Red China, and Fidel Castro. What they do is they take over the schools. They take over, and what they do is first they get the teachers. Most people don't know the biggest people behind Adolf Hitler in Germany in 1933 were the teachers of Germany, the college professors, the high school teachers, and the elementary schools. The biggest percentage of Nazis were from those groups. People always thought, oh, they're, roughnecks and this and that. No, they were the teachers. And they indoctrinated the children into Nazi thinking. The same thing with Lenin, with the young pioneers, Stalin, with the Cultural Revolution, which was also the Cultural Revolution was a revolution of children to go against their parents. And what all of this is about is to take over the minds of the young. And what they do is the next step, if I'm correct, is to try to indoctrinate their parents into, or even worse, turning their parents in. Maybe on social media this time, not in the form of the past and history, but, my mother still thinks that climate change doesn't exist. My mother is for, or my father is for keeping his gun. My mother or father is, voted for Trump. This is the danger out there. The kids are being indoctrinated, but the teachers are the main ones behind it. I do not know, and I will not say who is pushing the teachers. Usually, what's also happened when we were teachers, when I was teaching, we had very left-wing teachers, and we also had middle-of-the-road teachers, right-wing teachers. We talked in the lunchroom. Hey, we would talk politics. I remember a guy, I don't want to mention his name. I happen to like the guy a lot, But he was a crazy communist and would yell and scream about the Communist Party and everything. But we ate lunch together, and you know, we were okay. He happened to be a history teacher like me, and he was a great history teacher. He never allowed his politics into the classroom. He taught the curriculum. He taught it the way he should have taught it, the same as me. He allowed free thought in the classroom. He allowed critical thinking. He didn't give his opinions. He let the children find their way. We both used primary sources. We both used, we didn't use the textbook as much because we wanted the kids to learn different points of view. And then let the kid decide whether he was for maybe more left, maybe center, maybe right. But it wasn't our job to tell that kid how to think. Our job was to teach the kid how to think. I have seen in the public school system, children have come to me and told me teachers have said in the classroom that Donald Trump is similar to Hitler. And I said, who taught you that? And they said, well, the teacher said that. I didn't attack I didn't say anything about the Donald Trump. I said, well, you know, the teacher really shouldn't be talking about politics in the classroom or anything. That's something for you to decide to read about. He should be showing you more, you know, the different points of view. And, you know, when I talk to the kids like that, they sort of agreed. They really didn't understand, and these were 17, 18-year-olds. They really didn't understand that it wasn't okay for the teacher to say that. They thought that, it was shocking to me, they thought that that's what teachers do, that teachers that should teach them their way of thinking. They really didn't understand that that wasn't the job of the teachers. And I'm going to say something now. I don't even think that half of these teachers even know what they're doing. We can jump on them and say, oh, you know, they're left-wing teachers, they're this, they're that. It's just that they haven't been taught how to be real teachers. They've been taught in the colleges by their professors that it's okay to teach like this. I blame the schools of education. We'll talk about solutions later. But in conclusion, this is a problem that is moving forward. I see it as one of, in my opinion, because I've been in education for 150 years, I see it as probably the most important fight that we've ever had in this country. The most important. Because once you lose your children, you lose your nation. And Lenin knew that, Hitler knew that, Mao knew that, and Castro knew that. That's what we're up against. We are going to talk about solutions. Thank you.
All right, Jerry, thank you very much. Just be patient, folks, as I bring up one more graphic here. There we go. Okay. Come back. There you are. Okay, I'm going to share my screen one more time with you. All right, does everybody see a giant telephone? I hope so. All right, our next speaker goes by the name of Carol. Carol is a current teacher in New York City's public education system for, I'm told, over 30 years, who wants to share her personal experience. So, Carol, are you on the line?
Yes, I am.
Okay, Carol, take it away.
Okay. I wasn't going to start with this, but I do want to piggyback on something Jerry said. He reminded me of something. By the way, Jerry, you gave an incredibly wonderful opening view to what is happening in schools. And I see that as a teacher. And part of what I will say will echo with examples what you were telling everyone. You reminded me, we get these emails, we get a lot of emails about programs for students. And I recently got one from a group that wants to offer programs, civics programs for students so that they can work with the New York City Council and work on activities, which are protests, et cetera, and this would have a goal of becoming involved with our very left-wing New York City Council and how they become elected, what is needed, and the whole gist was these students will be voting and we want educated voters. So that was a really important point you brought up, and there is concrete evidence of that happening. I get these emails all the time. Anecdotally, I want everyone to first understand that school systems are closed systems, meaning what happens in a school stays in a school. It is not looked upon well for any inside happening event to go to the outside. Even as parents, someone has
The mass
their mic on?
repellents.
Hang on. Folks, put yourselves on mute, please. All right, Carol, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yes, got it. Okay, thank you. So schools are closed systems. So if something is happening to students, it is very unlikely that you will hear about.
Carol, I'm sorry, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. So what I was saying is that schools are closed systems, and what's happening in schools does not come out very easily. So by the time you find out what's going on, they are 10 steps ahead of you, which is why it's really important to get an idea of what's happening and that we do something. So in my case, I have students, they see how I teach. I'm very open-minded. I tell them you need to investigate, research both sides. And given that, they realize that I am not going to give them my opinion, and they come to me, they trust me, and they tell me what's happening in their classrooms. And as Jerry said, what's happening in college is now happening in high schools. When these students participate in conversations in the classroom, they are verbally attacked. If they do not toe that left-wing line, they are ostracized, students turn against them, and some teachers do make it very difficult for them. Grades are affected, and they do not feel free to speak in class. We had an incident 2 years ago when Greta Thunberg spoke at the UN. The schools, the New York City Department of Education allowed students with parental permission to leave the schools to attend these climate protests in the city. There was a walkout. Most of my school walked out, even teachers. Students told me that they left the school. They wanted to stay in class, but they did not remain in school because they were afraid if they did, other students would find out and realize what they thought about climate change, and they would again be ostracized or bullied. They did not want to be seen as participating. So that was an incredible eye-opener to me, that students would have to lie about their whereabouts in order to protect themselves. I also had a student who had an incident in her classroom where her teacher told everyone to write something down. There was a question about climate change, and they had to write down whatever they thought about this particular question. And we have kids sitting in groups, which, just as an aside, becomes a whole group think project, a whole kind of socialist setup where the one student is carrying the rest of the group. It's a very bad dynamic that we have going on in schools. And this student, because she's sitting in a group, she had to cover her paper because she was afraid that the other students would see her. And she was also afraid that the teacher would call on her for her answer. And this was said in an office setting where several of the teachers were there, and she was able to express herself. And I was absolutely shocked that this happened. And also the fact that the teacher could not understand that his position was really one-sided, and it did not leave any room for a student's opinion that may be differing from everyone else. And I think that's the biggest problem that we have, in that teachers, as Jerry said, many of them teach from a left-wing perspective. They are taught this in college. It's now filtered down into the high schools. It's moving very quickly into the elementary schools, as some of you may know. And the big problem is you do not have teachers that just say, you're not getting my opinion, you're going to read, you're going to research. And that's something I think we need to address when we offer some solutions. One of my really horrific experiences personally was in 2016 when President Trump won, and my school was in tears. The students were allowed to go out with the teachers and just stand on the sidewalk and cry. And I did not go out. I didn't have the necessity to cry. A few people remained in the building. And when the kids returned, one of my students said to me, realized I was not unhappy. He asked me, did you vote for Trump? I said, that's really not a question that we should be discussing in school, who voted for whom. So he said to me, I no longer have any respect for you, which from a student was earth-shattering. One of my first experiences that really amazed me was with political opinions from teachers was about 13 years ago. In the hallway, I was just discussing the curriculum with a teacher, and she said, we'll spend about 2 months on climate change. And I said, for what? It doesn't even exist. Why are we wasting 2 months? She started screaming at me in the hallway, screaming at me. People heard in classrooms. It was really quite an event. And most recently, I had a colleague with whom I teach, asked me a question about an event that had occurred on January 6th, and we're all familiar with it, asked me my opinion, and promised he wouldn't fight with me. And I said, fine, I do believe in open dialogue. And I was told by him after my opinion, and we had discussed many things in the past, and he would get a little steamy, but I felt you have to keep talking to people. You have to keep trying. And this particular time, I guess he blew a fuse. He said that he no longer felt he deserved to have my delusions in his workspace. And he was going to request that I no longer teach with him in the classroom. So I was canceled, and he needed a safe space. And this is from an adult who is a teacher. So these are just a few anecdotals. I can go on and on. We have a huge problem in the schools. Oh, one quick thing I did want to mention that Jerry said, Howard Zinn, that book. My daughter was given that about 12 years ago by her social studies teacher. It was an honors or an AP class. I briefed my daughter on the book and how she should be reading it and understanding it, and gave her other material. But that book is a destroyer of minds. And it is something in solutions that we should talk about. And that's it.
Okay. I'm sitting back trying to grab my breath here, Carol.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot more, but this really gives you an idea of an overview, and just multiply that by 1 million, because it's happening in every school on all levels. And think
Right.
about the students. The students are really, conservative students are at a true disadvantage.
Right. Okay. I'm
If
gonna
anyone
move-
has a chance, I will tell my stories also. I was a school nurse. And-
later, Enid, not now. We got to get through the program. And I don't mean to put you off on that. Save it. Definitely save it. But I gotta keep moving. Sean Frisch. Sean is the founder of Long Island Loud Majority and former Hofstra University student majoring in radio communications. Sean, are you there?
Yes, I am. Do you hear me all good?
I hear you now. I see you. Welcome to the program, Sean.
Thank you,
I
Joe.
gotta be honest with you, I'm just catching my breath from that last round. I can only imagine what you've got to offer.
Yep. So I'm going to share that with you. First, thanks to Phil and everybody involved for bringing me into this. I really appreciate it, and looking forward to telling the story. I was a registered Democrat in high school. First of all, I mean, just to touch on a couple of things that folks were saying, the indoctrination was going on. I graduated high school in 2009. So the indoctrination was happening back then too, just because Carol had mentioned something about climate change. And I was talking to someone about this today, about how climate change and you know, how the schools are just forcing a narrative on kids and forcing them to repeat it or else they fail. So this happened in high school. I mean, I was a Democrat. I believed all the stuff. I lapped it up, you know, like a, you know, whatever. It was sad, but we had to watch The Inconvenient Truth, right? We had to watch Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth in high school, and we had to take a test on it. And if we did not admit in that test that climate change was real and an existential threat to humanity, we would have failed the test, right? So I was forced in 10th grade to repeat that information. We find out a couple of years ago that The Inconvenient Truth was a rather inconvenient lie and everything was wrong. When I get to college at this point, I'm in Hofstra, and I'm still kind of very, very far left. I was too young to vote for Obama in 2008. I missed it by a few months. But my dad had given me for Christmas, because I used to watch Bill O'Reilly with him a little bit. And, you know, I used to think the word of the day was hysterical, right? I thought it'd be, oh, look at these words. Troglodyte was one of the Bill O'Reilly's words of the day. I thought it was hysterical. So he got me Pinheads and Patriots. I figured that's cool. I'll read it. And so I'm reading it in college, and people are shooting me these looks. I'm like, what is the problem? They're like, oh, you know, you're reading that. I'm like, it's Bill O'Reilly. Like it's not even like it's a, oh no, you can't read that. Okay. So I'm going through some of my classes in college, and you know, it was funny. It was mentioned earlier that, you know, politics are supposed to stay out of the classroom. And I can remember going through junior high and not really knowing where some of my teachers stood. But come high school, when it really started to seep in, I was able to figure out who were the liberals, who were the conservatives. And at that point, I liked the liberals, right? So I'm into college now. I'm going through, I've taken my first couple electives, and I have this one professor, believe it or not, who's a conservative. And I had already knowledge of who this guy was. And, you know, I was sitting there going, I'm going to prove this guy wrong, and I'm going to show him who's boss and blah, blah, blah. So I'm sitting down in class, and I'm listening to him and listening to him and listening to him. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to fact check that. And I couldn't. And I'm going to fact check this, and I couldn't. And I'm going to fact check. So sooner or later, I was just like, okay, look, I sat down with this guy, and I said to him, because I'm up front, right? I don't like to pull punches, you know, efficient conversation, right? I said to this guy, look, I knew who you were. I knew which way you leaned. I was ready to come in here and be a jerk and kind of show you up, and I couldn't. So, you know, long story short, as I walked into this class hating your guts, and now I'm wondering how the heck was I lied to this whole time through high school, my first couple of years of college, because clearly you're not wrong, because I can't prove you wrong, and I'm trying really, really hard. So we wind up having a good relationship, and I pay very close attention to his class the rest of the way. This was in 2012. Now, at the same time, my minor was political science. At the same time, my major was radio studies, and I was taking a class called radio feature production. And the assignment that we were working on at the time was to put together a radio feature about what would normally be a topic of your choosing. Right. But this time, because we were at Hofstra and it was 2012, the school was getting ready to host one of the presidential debates between Mitt Romney and Barack Obama. So the theme was not free reign. The theme was do something election based. Right. I was like, great, no problem. So we were talking in the political science class with the conservative professor about something called the fiscal cliff. I had no idea what that was. I sat down, I talked to him. It was the Bush tax cuts were set to expire, and we were in a recession. So essentially taxes were going to be going up, increasing during a recession, which historically causes either slow or no economic recovery, which my conservative professor had taught to the class. And I said, wow, this fiscal cliff thing, it seems like a huge issue. It's something that my classmates could probably relate to, because when I talk about taxes and talk about, do you like seeing all these taxes come out of your paycheck? And, they'll relate to that and kind of understand that. And I can put it in perspective where maybe they get it. Maybe we can move some votes, in the classroom. So I interviewed a liberal professor who I had for a class about the presidency. I interviewed a centrist who leaned left, and specifically asked her questions on, if the fiscal cliff were to expire in the United States of America, how would that impact globally? How would that impact the European Union? That's the class that she spoke on. So I had a liberal, I had a centrist who leaned left, and then I had the conservative professor in the piece. I figured, there it is. I'm going to balance it out. Everything's going to be good. So it came time in that class and we individually, what we would do is present our rough copy audio to the professor. We would sit, play it, and he would critique it and tell us what exactly we needed to work on. And, generally when we have done this with this professor, it was, production related stuff, right? Production value. Hey, that sound is out of place. You popped a P over there, clean this audio up, fade it better, little stuff like that, technical stuff. Well, I'm playing the feature and the conservative professor comes on and is explaining how the fiscal cliff and going over the fiscal cliff without extending those tax cuts could be really, really bad for the US economy. And once the professor heard that, he kind of like froze. And at the end of me playing the project, he goes, well, everything sounds really good, but you're going to have to take that guy out. And I said, why? And they said, well, because the piece is biased. And I looked at him and I said, well, he is just basically echoing the comments of these other two professors who leaned left. They all were under the assumption, they all came to the conclusion that if the fiscal cliff were to expire, it would not be a good thing for the economic recovery in the United States. I said, what? They're saying the same thing. So, but you got to take him out. It's biased. And I'm going, well, that's not fair. So I looked at this guy and I said, look, you may not agree with him, but that does not mean the entire piece is biased. I said, and if you were listening to the entire piece, you probably didn't agree with the two left-leaning professors beforehand, because they said literally the exact same thing. They just used different words. So I looked at him and we were back and forth. No, you got to take this out. You got that. That's biased. That's blah, blah, blah. I said, listen to me. I said, we've done this before. If there is an issue with my piece, when it comes to production value, if there is a sound out of place, if my levels aren't good, if there's a fade that doesn't sound right, if there's gaps and dead air and technical problems, and you want to dock me for that, that's great. That's all good and great. That's your job. I said, but so help you God, if you take points off of my project because you don't like what he is saying, I will have you fired faster than you can blink. And he froze. And he said, well, I would appreciate it. I said, I don't care what you'd appreciate. I would appreciate preserving free speech here. Right. So I kept the conservative professor in, and because I saw him get scared, I knew I kind of had this guy. So I did kind of put a little bit of a slant to the piece just to kind of stick it to him, because I'm a little spiteful like that. And I had the entire piece rolling the way it was supposed to roll. And at the end, I had the conservative professor kind of leave it on a grim note. And I signed off because it was supposed to get onto the campus radio station if it was produced well. I signed off with fingers crossed, as if, to say, we hope this doesn't happen. And the whole class was like, whoa, that's scary. And I watched this guy. My eyes were on this guy the whole time. And he kept looking. He didn't want to make eye contact with me while it was playing. He kept looking back and I was just grilling him. And the whole piece played and people started asking questions. What does it mean? The fiscal cliff. What does that mean? That sounds really scary. And I could tell that's exactly what he wanted to avoid in that class. He did not want these kids to know that these liberal policies that were getting ready to be put into place in the 2012 election cycle, in the middle of an economic recovery, he did not want that class to know that that was going to be devastating to the recovery, to the after the recession. He didn't want them to know that. He didn't want these kids to know that policies that were offered from the right side of the aisle were were policies that could even remotely come close to working. And when that piece played, after he tried to actively censor it, after he tried to tell me to take it out because it was biased, and when I signed off with that, he was in total shock. And I answered questions for the class. I said, yes, the fiscal cliff is very dangerous, and this could become a problem for us. I mean, you guys work. I said this to the whole class. You guys work. You see the taxes that come out of your paycheck. Imagine them taking more money. You want more money? You want less money? You want more money? You want less? Oh, we want more. We want more. I said, right. You should want more of the money that you work hard for. I said, we're all in college. You probably push a broom. You probably serve food. I sold, I drove for a paint store. I mean, these aren't glorious, wonderful jobs. We're working hard at that point. We're kids at that point. I said, you work hard for your money. Imagine someone who makes more, gets taxed even more. How do you think that's going to feel? You have less money to spend now, less money to put back into the economy. It's not a good idea to raise taxes in a recession. We heard it in the piece. And, that experience alone, that was back in 2012. I mean, we're now in 2021. This is 9 years later. And that back then was like, whoa, I can't believe that happened. But if I heard the same story today, the problem is I wouldn't be shocked. This is going on everywhere. Long Island, a couple of years ago, her name was Bella Moscato. I'll never forget. I met this girl. Her name was Bella Moscato. She was told the class experiment. She's like fourth grade or something like that. Okay. 8 years old, 9 years old. Pick your hero. She chose Donald Trump, and the teacher told her, you can't choose Donald Trump as your hero. We have teachers in our schools telling our kids who their heroes can and cannot be. And it is disgusting. So yeah, it happened to me when I was, 19, 20 years old, whatever it was, but it happened. It's happening still. And the only way, we'll talk about solutions, but the only way at that point that I found that I would not have my rights trampled was to sit there and look at this guy and say, no, I'm not taking him out, because number one, what he's saying is not conjecture. It's based in fact. He's citing historical examples. And just because you don't agree with it doesn't make it biased. Okay. That's not how, free speech works. And so what winds up happening, it plays in the class, and that piece actually got play on the campus radio station. And I got an A on the project and an A in the class. So it was a good experience for me, because what that did going forward, when you live through it, they say seeing is believing. What that did going forward was it showed me that these things that we were hearing, these little things. And now, especially when you think about it, 6 years, 7 years, 8 years later, when we look at what's going on now, where you can't even have the voice of the president of the United States on Facebook, or they're going to ban your account. I mean, or the former president of the United States. But think about how overreaching this is getting, where it was when it started. I mean, this was back in 2012. He's telling me to take a guy out of a radio project. Now we're here where you can't even say the man's name on social media without getting a red flag thrown on your account. And so the only option for me was to just literally say, I'm not playing your game. I'm leaving him in the piece. And if you take points off just because you don't like what the guy's saying, you're going to lose your job. And that's what I told him. And I wasn't afraid to tell him that, because I knew if that escalated, that I was in the right. Because then I would just be able to say, look, this guy's trying to literally dictate how I should do my project because of his point of view and not because of anything else. So when we talk about fixing the schools, when we talk about censorship or indoctrination or narrative pushing, it's something that I definitely, I could relate to. I experienced it, but I still hear about it, and it's getting worse. And, it just comes as far as I watch kids getting dropped off in the neighborhood. And I can remember in high school, I was in the marching band. I'd walk home with my instrument all the time. I see kids walking home with their instruments, but they got the mask strapped on over their face. And to these kids, unfortunately, that's becoming their normal. That's becoming their reality. And that's wrong. These are childhoods. You're taking a mind that is so malleable, an innocent mind that can be grown into something so spectacular, and you're shaping it to fit your own needs. That is so evil and so predatory and so disgusting. And the fact that I've lived, through that type of thing, but I see it happening everywhere else. It motivates me. It motivates, and it should motivate others to take a stand if they hear about these things going on in the schools, and put a stop to it. These are kids. They deserve to be able to their minds deserve to grow in whatever direction they push it, so long as it's within the boundaries of the law. We don't need a teacher shaping the way they think to fit an agenda or fit a narrative or anything like that. That is evil. And, just preserve free speech. That's what I'm about. I'm a free speech absolutist. I like to think of it as, give me all your ideas. We'll talk about them, and the best ideas will win. I think it was John Stuart Mill, and he said the only way to combat, lackluster ideas and oppressed speech is by more speech and better ideas. And that's the way it should be. But unfortunately, in these schools and stuff that I've gone through and stories that we're hearing tonight, that's not the way it is, and that's wrong, and it needs to be fixed. And I'm willing to do anything in my power to fix it, because I didn't like being a part of it. I didn't like it when it happened to me. It just so happened that I wasn't going to take it. But not everybody does that. There are a lot of people who will capitulate, and it's sad because they feel like there's no other choice. But my message, and it is to everybody, whether there's kids, students on the line or not, you do have a choice. If you know you're in the right, you do have a choice. Push back, fight back, stand your ground, because if you know you're in the right, then there's no possible way that you can be wrong. If somebody wants to fight you on 2 + 2 is 4, I'll take them all the way to the grave, because I know that 2 + 2 at the end of the day does equal 4. And there's no case, there's nothing that anybody can say to change that. So in that situation, I knew it. I was in the right. There's nothing that anyone can do to say that I was wrong in this case. I'm doubling down. I'm telling this guy, if you take points off of this paper, or you take points off of this assignment, just because you don't agree with what one person said, you're going to lose your job. So choose wisely. That's what I did. Wound up getting an A. It was a very, rewarding experience for me, because it pushed me further, along this path. And now we're just making a ton of noise out here on Long Island, trying to advance the conservative agenda and take our state back. So it was a good thing.
Excellent job, Sean. Excellent job. And keep speaking loudly. All right. Because we can't hear you in Queens yet.
Oh, you'll hear us. We'll be out there. We've been doing some work with some other clubs as well. So you'll hear us.
Good. We need you.
You got it.
All right. Our next speaker is going to be Professor Nicholas Giordano. Nick, take it away.
Thank you, Joe. And I'm going to get into the why and how this is all happening, as well as what's the end goal? What's the end game? Because basically, when you sum it up, all the bad ideas that we see currently going on, they all filter out of a university system. That's where they begin. And then they start to work them way down and infect all aspects in our society. And part of it is for nefarious purposes, but other parts are because of sheer incompetence. And that's what we're seeing today, what play itself out. I think Sean is absolutely right. It's a problem that's been going on for 20 years and getting worse and worse as time does go on. One of the things that people don't ask questions, because we don't teach how to think critically anymore, is who's making money off this? Always follow the money. There's a big business. It's big industry. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry that provides the critical race theory training to the teachers, that provides the critical race theory materials to the schools. There's a lot of money to be made. And most of the money is being made, ironically, by rich white liberals who own these companies. So I think that's very interesting. But this is something that does go deeper than just a money-making operation. And it is far more nefarious because we've been told that this was going to happen. This is not like something that came out of left field and we're surprised by it. As far as someone that's been in academia for a long time, we saw the trend, we saw where this was going. And as someone that studies political science and I study socialist movements and communist movements, I have a very good working knowledge of the Democrat Socialists of America. They use teaching as a strategic means to transform the minds of young people. They understand the power that has, that if you control the youth, if you build out a youth that's based on obedience and compliance, it's much easier to fulfill certain goals that you want to achieve. And they also knew, and these documents are all available online. You could find the socialist documents, the Democrat Socialist document agenda online. But they talked about infiltrating unions to help shape the militancy of the unions, to make the unions much more politically active, much more ideological. They talked about that the educator has a duty not being unbiased in the classroom. They actually talk about that teachers are not supposed to be neutral in the classroom. And this is what they're pushing out there. So if you have socialist instructors at the university level that are teaching these teachers, well, of course, they're going to take what they learned from these professors and start bringing it in the K through 12 classroom. And that's what we really start seeing. We also see that there's a lot of these far left individuals that infiltrated the textbook industry. The textbooks are part of the key to this, because if you look at many of the textbooks that exist, it's all far left ideological nonsense, most of it, where it shapes and puts the United States in a bad light. But there's a bigger problem, and that's that teachers weren't trained properly. There's teachers in my generation, the entitlement generation, that were told that our opinions are important, that our opinions matter. Now, a real teacher knows that your opinions are not important inside a classroom, that your first goal is to get students to think, to probe and question students, that if a student comes at me from the right or conservative perspective, I'm going to ask them questions from a liberal perspective and challenge them. If they come at me from the left, I'm going to challenge them with a conservative perspective, because it's my job to push my students to get them to use their brain, to think, to start looking at primary sources, and to be able to come to their own conclusion. So when we look at this, you have teachers that aren't trained properly, that are told that their opinion matters, that they have to be biased in the classroom. And so they take this and they take it out on their students. They believe that it's their job as an educator to indoctrinate their students. And the saddest part is that many of these teachers, they don't have a real grasp over the subject material. So they're relying on the secondhand source material, the biased materials themselves, to teach it. And then you have a group of teachers that don't agree with any of this, but their hands are tied. See, I teach out of college, and I'm lucky because I'm in charge of my own curriculum. I'm in charge of my classroom. I get to dictate what I'm going to teach and how I'm going to teach. If you're in the K through 12 system, you have to abide by what the curriculum is. You have to teach what the powers that be tell you to teach. And so if they're incorporating this critical race theory, no matter how much you reject it, no matter how much you disagree with it, you're still forced to teach this. And we've created a culture of fear within academia, that if you speak out, you're going to be targeted. And we've seen teachers targeted. So many of them have remained quiet. And the left knows the tactics. They understand that fear tactics work, that if you get people to shut up, if you get them to obey, if you get them to self-censor, that's how they win. And what's the goal here? So when we look at it, Jerry brought up that Horace Mann he's like the father of the education system. Horace Mann came about in the 1930s. We started building out a public education system, but just because our founding fathers didn't create it, it wasn't lost on our founding fathers that we need a public education system. And I always like to look to Noah Webster, because Noah Webster is critically important. And you may know his name. It may sound familiar because he had the dictionary. But he was someone that was disgusted that a lot of the documents for children, a lot of the texts that existed for children, that they ignored American culture, that they ignored American history. He understood, and I'm going to read a direct quote. He understood, quote, "Every child in America should be acquainted with his own country. He should read books that furnish him with the ideas that will be useful to him in life and practice. As soon as he opens his lips, he should rehearse the history of his own country," end quote. And that's what our American education system is supposed to be about. Yes, you have the 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic. But the education system in the United States was designed to create nationhood. We don't have a shared history together of 5,000 years. We don't have a common culture here in the United States. There's very little that links us together. And so Noah Webster understood that the education system is going to be critically important in building out this sense of nationhood that links us together, that binds us together, that creates good citizenry, where we get behind the concepts of liberty and freedom, where we understand the Declaration of Independence and the American political philosophy. And so you have to focus on American history in the school systems. It's important to know where we come from and how our country was built. And guess what? And this is the amazing part, because you find professors that do ideologically, I'm a conservative. But the reality is, I understand the greatness of America, because we also understand that we do have to teach past sins of American history. We teach it warts and all. and we let the students come to their own conclusion. We allow the students to think critically. We tell them, read the Declaration of Independence yourself, read the United States Constitution, not hard documents to read and come to your own conclusion. What's happened is the left has infiltrated the education system, and they understand they don't make the kids read the Declaration of Independence anymore. They don't make the kids read the United States Constitution anymore. 90% of my students never looked at the United States Constitution. Instead, they give them textbooks and they rely on other people's interpretation of the United States Constitution, Declaration of Independence. And this is what creates the situation that we're in today. And there's a reason that it's going on. The far left, they understand that if we teach American political philosophy, if we teach concepts of liberty, if we teach concepts of freedom, that it goes against the far left agenda. That if we teach people to think for themselves, they'll reject the ideas of the far left. And so they've been able to exploit our education system by introducing race. I want everyone to really clearly understand this extraordinarily well, because it's being taught to kids as young as 4 years old. We now have a system where you have people complaining that there is systemic racism in the United States, and it goes against Blacks, Hispanics, and other minority communities. And in order to solve that problem, we're now going to introduce racist policies. We're now going to incorporate systemic racism to fight racism. Critical race theory is toxic to this country because what it does is it says that if you are born white, you are inherently racist. Nothing you could do about it except acknowledge that you're a racist, that you're an oppressor. What does this do to kids that are 4 or 5 years old? And when I started, I said it starts at the university system. Critical race theory has been being taught since the 1970s at the college level. It was never a required course. 5 years ago, 6 years ago, colleges started to require it as a course for a bunch of different majors. And now it's trickled down to the K through 12 system. So at least in college, you have adults, young adults that could sort of come to their own conclusion if they want to take the initiative and do their own research. But imagine telling a 4-year-old that either you're white and you're inherently an oppressor and a racist, or you're a minority and you're inherently a victim. No matter what you do in life, you're always going to be a victim and you're always going to be oppressed. And so what does this do to their psyche? What does this do to their mindset? And it's nothing more than a tactic that's being used, the divide and conquer strategy. Pit the races against each other and the house of cards crumbles. That's the way you destroy the United States. The socialist movement was never successful in the United States. If you understand what communism is about, it was always about the worker revolution. It was always about the worker rising up against the corporate masters. That never happened in the United States because the middle class lives pretty well. And so the socialists failed, the communists failed. But then they understood that since they can't divide us on a class structure here in the United States, they're going to divide us on race, because we are the only country in this entire world, that has a mix of all these different people here that are essentially all different backgrounds, different cultures, different ethnicities. And the kicker is we coexist well together. We actually do coexist. What you see in the media is not reality, but yet they want to make it reality. And you don't want this becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that's why it's so concerning that parents have disengaged from the education system. We'll talk more about that when we get to the solutions, but that is a brief overview of the how, why, and what the end goal is of these people. So I'll throw it back to you, Joe.
All right. Thank you very, very much, Nick. Appreciate it. And sorry for the delay there. All right. So now we're going to go to the second part of our program. And this is the speakers offering their solutions. All right. And then don't forget, there's a third part where we're going to have some Q&A. So we're going to lead off with Jerry Matakata. Jerry, what is your solution?
Well, to be honest, we had spoken before, especially Nick and I, about the solution. So I'll do a few, and I'm sure the other people will do more. But, the people on this panel, I feel are very, very smart, understand everything. So the solutions are going to overlap. But my first solution is what Nick talked about, and that is the number one teacher are the parents. And they should never forget that. Even in Nazi Germany, even in Russia, even in China, the parents saw what was happening and spoke to their kids. They are the number one teacher. Remember, the teachers are only in the classroom, especially the history teachers, civics teachers, they're only in the classroom for 45, 50 minutes. The parent is with the kids early on, and it starts when they're young, talking to the kids about the values that we talked about, so that when they are indoctrinated, they have some type of foundation in order to understand that, hey, this is really not true. My parents taught me to think about a lot of things. Like they thought there's only one race, there's the human race. Civilization has been a form of progress. Things like the easy things that parents can teach their kids. The second thing, another easy thing, look at the work. You'd be surprised how many, the kids go home, the parents never even look at the work. What type of work is going on? What's their textbook? The other day, I was in a classroom and I looked at the text because of Nick. I look at the Prentice Hall American History textbook and the Prentice Hall World History. It's like a busman's holiday, obviously. But, I'm looking at look at the textbooks, see what's in there. And then if you say, hey, you know what, Sally, let's talk about what the textbook says about this. Is this true? Is it not true? Let the kids talk. Because on some level, the kids are smarter than you think they are. I always found that out. The one thing that teachers had problems with, they didn't realize how smart the kids were. The third thing that I would like to talk about is, and this is not left, right, or center. That's one of the things, I don't want to say, we're as conservative thought and, whatever your political thoughts are, whatever, you have one thought, and that's how great America is. Join the PTA, run for school boards, get involved in organizations that protect civic history, be aware. One of the things I spoke about, I think that this is very important, that when you hear the word civics now coming out of school systems, you must be prepared. What they're talking about is different than what you're talking about. They're talking a different civics. The civics that we all agree was nonpartisan, et cetera, knowing how to vote, et cetera, is not the same civics. When you see that coming out of, when you see your student having a project like that, you have to question the student, say, hey, what is this about? And if necessary, go up to the school. You have every right to go into the school, by the way, every right. You're a taxpayer, you have every right to go into the class, or the principal first, and say, I'd like to see Mr. X's class in history. And you're allowed to, be nice and you talk to Mr. X. I loved when parents came into my room. Hey, I'd like to see, your lesson on whatever, civics or, the Puritans or Declaration of Independence. Just sit there, don't say anything, and just sit there and see what the teacher is saying, take notes or whatever. And that goes a long distance.
Jerry,
That goes a long distance. Most teachers most parents do not know that they're allowed to go into the schools. So
Thank you.
that's solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Appreciate it. We're tight on time here. All right, Carol, you're next.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, good. Okay, so I will make this quick. I'm not going to repeat what Jerry said, except for maybe one thing. Parents have got to be involved K through 12. It starts in the very beginning. Do not miss a parent-teachers conference. Get into that school, look at the bulletin boards, look at the signs on the door. I kid you not, you will get a lot of information. As he said, go to the PTA meetings, go on school trips. You learn a lot about your child's teacher when you do things like that. You have to get the atmosphere of your school. When they come home, go through their book bags. Many schools no longer really use the textbooks. They do give them out, but they make up their own worksheets. That's where you really see a teacher's intent. Look at the child's homework. If you have a high school student with that book from Howard Zinn, written by Howard Zinn, for history, you have to get yourself Mary Graber's book, Graber. I do not remember it, but it's a refute of Howard Zinn. Oh, yes, school board. Jerry mentioned it. If you have the time, school board is where the decisions are made. It is critical. And the most important thing, talk to your child. Not what happened today. Get into some topics, discuss it, find out if it's spoken about in school. That's it.
Okay, Carol, thank you very much. Professor Giordano, you're up.
Well, one of the things I want to say, and I want to encourage parents out there, is when you speak to your child, you find out what's going on in school. Also, let your child know that it's okay if they push back as well. I think that too many times we sit there and think we don't want our child pushing back because we don't want them being targeted. But the children, I mean, that's how we create strong citizens, by pushing back, by questioning authority. We want our children to be respectful and not disrespect teachers. But at the same time, look at the environment that they're living in today, where they're told never to question anything, where they're constantly being told, pull up your mask, pull up your mask, pull up your mask. And there's no one there to push back and say, hey, leave me alone, leave the kid alone, let them, think for themselves. So I would say, make sure you encourage your kids to also push back if they find something that there is in there that they don't like, because guess what? The left-wing kids do. They certainly push back when a conservative says their thoughts, but we have to go further than that. And this is where we need to contact our elected officials, not just here in New York, not just in our little jurisdictions, whether you live on Long Island or the city area, but throughout the country, because guess what? The Republicans control the majority of state legislators out there. Why haven't we heard of state legislative investigations into the education systems and what's being taught into our classroom? Why haven't we heard about investigations going on into critical race theory in all the states where Republicans are in control? So we have to start pushing our politicians more, and we have to start holding people accountable, whether it's at the most local level with the school board, whether it's, getting involved and getting parents active and starting to coordinate with parents. But we also have to recognize that the legislators, this is their job. This is what we elect them to do. And if they're not willing to get involved, well, then they shouldn't be in office as well. So we got to start holding people accountable. That's going to be critical if we want to take back the education system.
Okay, Nick, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Pardon my voice there. All right, Sean, you're up next.
Gotcha. So, kind of to echo what Nick had said. Obviously, I'm not a parent, so I don't know what goes on in terms
Take
of
your
parenting.
time.
But what I can say is, I would encourage it, for those of you on the call who are parents, who got kids in the system, to do what Nick just had mentioned and said. Encourage them to push back, not disrespectfully, not to do it to cause a ruckus or to rebel or to be, the class clown or anything, but to push back if they truly feel like something is wrong. With all the rallies that we hold, I've met kids, literally 13 years old, 14 years old, 16 years old, and they tell me stories that, XYZ happened in the classroom. Oh, I had a loud majority sweatshirt and my teacher told me to take it off. I had a shirt that said, Trump, and my teacher told me I had to cover it up. I mean, back when I was in high school, the only things we had to cover up were like beer shirts or things like that. Now you got to cover up the name of the president of the United States. So I encourage all of these kids, and I do it with their parents next to me. I said, you should maybe just ask why. It's okay to ask, why do I have to cover up this name? It says Trump. What's the problem? Why must I cover it up? Pushing back is very important. Standing up and giving no ground is extremely important, because every time we give ground to the left, we wind up in a really, really bad situation, right? We wind up backed up against our own goal line. Football reference, you may start at midfield, you may start with good field position, but you keep getting called for delay a game. And if you get called for delay a game too many times, you get backed way up. Next thing you know, it's 4th and 35. that's a problem, and we've been playing from behind, and we've gotten so used to playing from behind that, we kind of feel like it's always about playing catch up, but it doesn't have to be that way. And Nick was saying the same thing. It doesn't have to be that way. The left wingers come out and did that. They come out and get upset. They come out and change the way things are. Else, how else do you think we would have wound up here? Right. So pushing back and empowering the kids to say, if like I said, if that 2 + 2 is 4, and your math teacher is telling in order to pass this test, you have to write 2 + 2 is 5. You put your foot down and you say, no, that's just not true. If you're being told, like I was told, to take a conservative or to take one type of voice out of your project, it's okay to ask your teacher, well, why are you taking out the guy who says Donald Trump is good versus the other people who say Donald Trump is bad? If anything, this balances out the piece. This doesn't bias the piece or skew it in one direction. So empowering children to actually push back and to tell the parents, maybe the kids are afraid to push back. Maybe they're afraid to question the teacher, but to bring these things to someone's attention, whether it's a parent, an older sibling, another teacher, somebody in the school who the kid maybe they trust, and say, hey, Mr. So-and-so, really treated me terribly today because I wore a shirt with the Republican elephant on it. And I don't know what to do. They have to, but silence. There's the line the left use. Silence is compliance, right? With the whole George. It's the same thing. If you remain quiet about it, nobody will know about it. Nobody will be able to do anything about it. So I would empower these kids to just tell their stories to someone. I know them. I know some of their stories. I'm not good enough. These guys and gals need to tell their stories to mom, dad, Uncle Jim, Aunt Jenny, whoever it might be. Tell it to your guidance counselor if you have to. Bring it to the principal's attention. Bring it to your parents, your brother, your sister's attention, but bring it somewhere else besides just that classroom, or else it's never going to stop. Pushing back and giving no ground. When they always tell you to fight bullying in the school by maybe not pushing back, but standing up and standing your ground and not folding and not wilting under that pressure. Same rules apply. That's my solution. That's what I would say for all these kids to do.
Thank you, Sean. Appreciate it. And as soon as you can come back to Queens and help us get some of our young people together. I noticed Alex Katz suggested that our club try to set up events focused on young people. Maybe you can help us do that. All right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's what we'd love to see happen in our club.